I want to get into is the ways that particularly good and evil is being really horribly handled from the bits that I am seeing, and like spoilers. Okay, so the words that Galadriel's brother, is it Finrod? Finrod?
Finrod.
Yeah. The words that Finrod says to her about touching the dark to know what's truly light. That's no. So that's one, and I want to just mention. So another one is the latest one about the Mithril being created from the light and the dark, and that the elves need that to keep their light sustained. But it's it's strong because of the evil and the good, and we need that to. Well, also, I don't know why they're fading. I don't understand that, first of all. But I'm sorry, I'm giving all the things. But those are the two egregious examples of no, you don't understand. This is Tolkien. He did have dark characters, as Richard has gone through in his podcast, but it's the essence of good and evil are not.
So,
please take it away.
Okay, so so when I first heard that line in the first episode of which I watched with Reno, we went to a theater together for the premiere of the first 2 episodes.
How was that?
Well, I mean, it was a fun experience because I got to hang out with Reno, and we went to the only thing that was still open, which was an Irish pub. Which there are a few Irish pubs in the area here, and they're all open till like 2 a.m. and they have Guinness on tap. And so that's where we went afterwards to kind of like debrief, and that was a fun time. So overall it was a fun experience. But when I heard that line, I thought to myself, oh no, that's really bad. Like, but then I just sort of like, I eventually kind of shrugged it off because I said I want to be charitable here, and so like maybe because some of the writing, some of the dialogue and the lines are like they're clearly somebody was like, this sounds cool, like a Tolkien thing, let's put it in, but it's a little bit like when somebody tries to speak, Shakespearean, and they put, they just but they end up putting, I mean, there are even like some liturgical translations that are trying to do like high liturgical English, but they don't understand how verbs actually worked in Shakespeare's time, and so the whole thing ends up coming across like really bad and atonal. There's one particular egregious example of this, which I won't name right now because it'll make some people sad. But anyway, so there's that like when somebody's trying to talk like it's Shakespeare times, but then they don't understand how to conjugate verbs or something like that, and so so if you know what you're listening for, it kind of just it sounds fake and it sounds kind of dumb. A lot of the dialogue in the show has struck me in that way. Somebody read a Tolkien book and they heard, and they're like, oh, Tolkien uses all these. What's in a Tolkien story? Well, there's trees and there's light. So let's tree, light, lighty tree, light. And so a lot of the dialogue kind of comes across that way. So I thought, well, maybe they just thought this would be a cool line and it's not actually going to be very important. And then in the most recent episode 5, which my review of episodes 4 and 5, we're recording on a Monday. So actually tomorrow, after the recording of this, so it'll already be out. You can go to Deacon Nicholas Kotar's podcast and listen to us talk about episodes 4 and 5. But again, in episode 5, they actually brought the line back around again, but they had it as something Galadriel was saying to somebody else, another character who had done some really bad things, basically telling him it's okay, you can recover from that, which is true itself. Like, obviously redemption is possible, repentance is possible, but the way that she says it is to use this line, in other words, saying, well, obviously without falling into evil, without touching the darkness, without really going into the without like really delving into evil, how can we be sure what is real? And it has this weird vibe. Like, there is a Dantean sense in which you could argue for something kind of like this, but it's more like, well, until we confront our sin, which is what the Inferno is about, we're not able to we're not able to properly reject it and receive the gift of the vision of God, which is kind of what the whole comedy is about. But instead, it seems to be more like the teenager who is like, well, unless I try drugs or unless I sleep
And this
around
is
or
good, and it's just part of
unless
my
I
journey. Hmm.
unless I get to, right, then unless I get to go on like Rumspringa here, like Elven Rumspringa, which is what Galadriel seems to be doing. Unless I
That
Yes. Unless I get to go on like Elven Rumspringa here, then I'll never really know
Okay, I don't actually.
what
What is that? Is it a German something?
Rumspringa is. An Amish thing. It's
Oh,
like
okay.
when Amish kids hit a certain age, they've been living this
Oh,
really
they've got to go out to the
sequestered
world.
life.
Yeah, yeah.
They go out to the world and they spend I think it's a year. But they spend like a certain, they can live in the world and do whatever they want, and then at that point they get to decide whether they want to come back to the community
Right.
and whether the community wants them back. But anyway, so it's sort of this idea that like unless I get to go out and like like try all the things, how will I? And the reason this really frustrates me is because of course Galadriel has actually been in the light of the trees. She's actually been in the presence of the gods. She knows what actual holiness is. But then for her character here to say, actually, I don't have an authentic experience of holiness unless I decide to get down into the muck, to get down into the mire, right? And to pull the whole franchise down there with me, incidentally. Unless I do that, then I'm not going to really be able to have anything to compare my experience of holiness to. That's a very anti-Tolkien idea. It's also a very anti-Christian idea. That is not at all how we understand the experience of God, the vision of God, right? But actually, in the Christian tradition, in our mystical and ascetic tradition, the way that you prepare yourself for the vision of God is through ascetic labor, is through fasting and prayer and vigil and constant vigilance over your thoughts and all these other things, right? All the things that you have to give up so that you're able to experience the vision of God. And but for this version of Galadriel, it's more like, no, I have to really get down in the mud, because otherwise, how am I going to know what is really true and what is really good? And so I was willing to sort of give them that maybe this is just a fluke. Maybe somebody's just thought it was a cool line and they didn't really think about the metaphysical implications. But then with the most recent episode, that appears to not be the case. This appears to be a well that the showrunners are committed to going back to as sort of forming the metaphysical framework for at least this first season. Now, they might have redemptive story arcs planned for Galadriel. They seem to kind of imply that in this most recent episode. So we'll see where that goes. But then when it comes to the whole Mithril thing, first of all, I found
Okay, wait.
Yes,
So,
go ahead.
Can we pause? Because I do want.
Yes.
So I should.
Yes.
I'm a bad moderator here. So I should have waited and brought it up later because I know there's thoughts. But
the Mithril thing makes me apoplectic.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, good. Shit. Yeah. Okay, so sticking with the Galadriel and the words. So Reno, I want to hear your thoughts, and then I do want to hear your replacement words, each of you, and then we'll move on to the Mithril thing. So please. Reno.
Yeah, I'm the same way, though. I was more suspicious when I first heard it. Not more suspicious, and not more incensed. But I just knew that this is the framework for in the writer's room, right? Yeah. So the way you have a showrunner, and maybe you have got, I'm not sure how many writers they have on staff, 5 to 10.
We should say here that Reno has actual filmmaking experience, which he's too modest to mention, but he's actually been involved in the production of films.
Okay.
And so he's got a little more experience about the process than I would have. So
okay.
And so, like Richard said, this is a framework by which I felt when I first heard it. It's like, this kind of new agey, light, dark, yin yang, kind of Johnny Cash, and this is they're disrespecting Johnny Cash, but kind of Johnny Cash gospel of tasting and touching and feeling as much as a man can before he repents, or something like that, right? That's actually U2's The Wanderer. They had Johnny Cash sing those lines. Very concerned about that. And, or also, in complete contradiction to what Tolkien says, right? So we've got two examples of just kind of really brief examples of light in The Lord of the Rings, right? Gimli, as in The Ring Goes South, he says, people love to quote this too, faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens, right? But Elrond says, maybe, but let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. It's like, okay, I can see how maybe it's like, oh, wait, you've got to touch the night or something like that. But it's not what Elrond is saying. If you haven't seen nightfall, then don't be so bold to say, I'm going to go through the darkness.
Yeah.
Right? Don't pledge that. But then at the end of that, Elrond gives them the benediction, which is, may the stars shine upon your faces. Right? Also, Galadriel, right, gives Frodo this gift, right, which is the phial that has the light of the star of Erendil in it, right? The star hanging above. And she says to him, right, it will shine still brighter when the night is about you.
Okay.
May it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. Remember Galadriel and her mirror.
We just read that in The Two Towers.
And so what I think what we have here, and I'm looking forward to seeing Richard riff off of this, but it's a philological problem. Okay. The rendering here is what we have is a scribal error in which the parts of speech have been misapplied.
Okay, so you're going to pick it apart for me?
Well, I'm just going to say that without getting into too much detail, that the agency has been reversed, that the actor and the object are reversed, that instead of touching the darkness, right, in reality, what a good translation might be is that the darkness falls upon you. Right? This is what we hear from Elrond and Galadriel. When the night is about you, right? When or when you see the night fall, we might say when you see the night fall about you. And here we have two lines that are from Tolkien's work where we could put them into the script and we suddenly have an echo to the manuscript, right? So when Finrod, when Galadriel says, right, it's hard to say which way is up and which way is down, right? How am I to know which light to follow? Finrod whispers. What he actually said, and what the writer should have put and known this if they were properly translating Tolkien's work, or the Red Book of the West March, and the 3 books of tales that Bilbo translated while he was at Rivendell. When the night falls about you, the light of the stars, and we might even include untouched by Morgoth's malice, will shine upon your face. And indeed, this is what happens, because when Galadriel jumps out of the boat, the first shot we see is her looking up to the stars, and there's the sickle of the Valar shining upon her face. And it's and this is the kind of ham-fisted, completely missed opportunity that I think sets the stage for the entire show. That it's not about touching the darkness. It's about when darkness falls upon you, that is when you see the true light shining.
Of
right?
course.
That's, I mean, it's simple and basic, and that's something that I think Tolkien would have resonated with, and I think it's true to his, and it would have changed the entire tone of the show. But that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted a show about people touching the darkness, getting icky, Game of Thrones style, and then kind of running back to the light.
I mean, you'd think Gollum wasn't enough of that for them. Richard, do you have words? Have you prepared some words?
So when I think about this, I a lot of thoughts that were astonishingly close to Reno's.
I
There
kind
is,
of imagined that if you're going back to the source, that
yeah.
would make sense. Yeah.
What I think that if I was going to say it like in a sort of like more pithy way or just like a more succinct way, because this is supposed to be like a line that comes up over and over again. So if it's long, then people won't get that it's a callback, right? So I would just say something like, "When darkness falls, remember the light," right? And I think for me, the idea of memory and remembering, I mean, this is the most fundamentally Christian act, right? Is literally, right, doing this in memory of me, right? The most it's a fundamental thing to the elves and their relationship with light, like, and this is one of the things that I'm really disheartened by, especially in this most recent episode of Rings of Power, is this idea that elves have like a battery of light, and like they can like pour light into things, or like their light batteries need to be recharged, like they're a glow in the dark frisbee, and you have to hold it under the light inside before you go outside. So like,
Yeah.
but that's not what their relationship to light is at all, right? Obviously light is very important to them, and it is related to their fading and all this different stuff in the legendarium, but their relationship with light, and in particular the light of the stars, has more to do with memory, which Tolkien, in a lot of his writing, which, I mean, this would have been a great thing to delve into if you were making a TV show about this stuff. In a lot of his Tolkien, his writings about the elves, elven society, elven culture, things like this, he talks about how their memory is different, that they are always sort of walking backwards through life, right? So whereas man is always walking forward into the unknown, elves are always walking backwards into it. And one of the things that comes out of this is that elves have perfect recall. Elves don't forget things, but they see the world around them fading, and they remember the way it used to be. And this is the crux of elven sorrow. And what's really meant by fading in that sense is that the world around them is changing, right? So they took these, in the Jackson trilogy, they took these wonderful lines from Treebeard in the book, and they gave them to Galadriel in what is the greatest voiceover montage that has ever been made in film, right? Where Galadriel says the world is changing, right? So the elves know that the world is changing, but the problem is that the elves aren't, right? And so this is why they need the rings of power. The rings of power, what the rings allow them to do is it allows Galadriel to make Lothlorien a place where time doesn't happen, right? That the time and this is explicit in the text, but if you want to know more about this, there's a great book by Verlyn Flieger called A Question of Time, which looks at time and the legendarium. And one of the things that she posits in there very convincingly is Tolkien had these ideas about time and story and things like this, time, story, and memory, that he's working out throughout all of his subcreative process, and that Lothlorien is kind of the crux of all of that. And in the Lothlorien sequence, in that part, we see as Frodo is leaving Lothlorien, he has this feeling of as he's being carried away down the Anduin River, he has this feeling of the world rushing by Lorien, leaving it like an island in the middle of the river of time, and the rest of the world is rushing by it. So what do the rings do? They allow the elves to create these places that are untouched by time, that allow them to make things that are, a place that is undying, right? Which is what Lorien is, as long as Galadriel is there. And so part of the great pain of loss of the whole quest of the ring is that Galadriel knows that once the One Ring is destroyed, that she will lose this ability. And so she has to decide. I mean, the thing that Galadriel has always wanted is dominion, its rule, its power, right? Not revenge, but a desire to rule, which in Tolkien is a much more dangerous and much more complex motivation. So there's a huge missed opportunity here, I think, for that character. Because if they could have really gone some interesting places with that, and they decided not to. But that desire to rule and to have a place, a realm of her own, right, is the way that she phrases it. In order to defeat Sauron, she also has to give that up. So the defeat of their greatest enemy is also the death of their greatest hope. So when she makes that renunciation, that is why she says, I have passed the test. Right? So this is her test. By rejecting the ring, she rejects all the rings. And now she gets to pass into the West. And so this is but all of this is connected to the elven, the importance for the elves of memory and the relationship with the stars, with starlight, the light of the trees, all these different things is closely tied to this memory, right? The reason the Silmarils are so desired is because they are the only place in which the memory of the two trees lives, right, in an incarnated way. And so I think that this is a really important aspect of Elven culture, and it's a much more nuanced relationship with light, which weirdly enough, for all of the many sins of the Hobbit films, this is one thing that they got right. Tauriel is having this conversation with Feely, maybe. I think it's Feely. Anyway, one of the two. I forget. I get them.
The Poldark guy.
Yeah, the Poldark guy. Thank you. Yeah. She's having a conversation with him, and she's talking about why starlight is a big deal, which is something as a dwarf he doesn't really get. And then she says,
the earth. Yeah.
And then she says, and it's the best line in those three films. She says, "It is memory for us," and it was like in all the things that I hated about that movie, there was that one line, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, someone understands this."
Yeah.
And so if I wanted to boil all of this down to what should Finrod have said, it would be something like "When darkness falls." It's not "if darkness falls." It's "when darkness falls," which would have also been like a nice foretelling or foreshadowing of the darkening of Valinor, but then would also be a nice foreshadowing or foretelling of all the things that Galadriel was going to have to do in her war against Sauron. When darkness falls, you could say, when darkness falls, look up and remember the light, or just simply when darkness falls, remember the light, something like that. Because that is, of course, that's the scene on the stair of Cirith Ungol, one of the great moments in The Lord of the Rings. It's when Sam is lying there and they feel totally crushed by the weight of their quest. And then he looks up and he sees the star and he says, "You know, Mr. Frodo, the light in that star right there, that's the same light as in the phial, the crystal that the lady gave you," right? And in that sense, I think this line would also have been a much more powerful foreshadowing of the role that Galadriel plays in The Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Which is not, okay, Frodo, you got to go touch the dark to know the light, but it's rather you have to go into the dark. Why do you have to go into the dark? It's not so that you can find out if it's real or not, but you have to go into the dark because someone has to do this. Someone has to bear this burden. And I'm sorry it's you. Nobody wants this job, but you're it.
Yeah.
And so because you're about to go into the darkness, here is light to guide your way and to sort of help you keep a memory of fair things.
Hello there, friends. Andrea with the Bangs here. Thank you for watching that clip. If you're interested to watch the rest of the episode, be sure to turn on your notifications so you'll know exactly when the full episode drops.